So I welcome all my panelists. So these are the references which we are based on in discussions. So starting with the first case scenario. She's a Mrs. X, 24-year-old, primary gravida with 39 weeks pregnancy, with vertex presentation, with history of regular antenatal checkups, and she had no complications and very sure of the dates, comes to OPD for routine antenatal checkup. So Dr. Awasthi, how to proceed in this case?
Good morning, ma'am. It's a great pleasure to share the screen with you. At the outset, a 24-year-old primary gravid at 39 weeks of gestation with vertex presentation on a regular antenatal checkup. I would actually, the routine checkup as usual, making sure her BP is normal, and on a per abdominal examination, I would like to see the presentation, rule out any malpresentations to make sure that it is cephalic. And I would like to do it per vaginal examination to assess the favorability, to see the Bishop score. And if the Bishop score is favorable, I would like to wait for spontaneous onset of labor. That is, wait till 40 weeks of gestation. But always to make sure that she's not in having labor, she's not in labor, not having contractions. In that case, I would like to wait till she goes into active labor, that is up to 40 weeks of gestation.
Thank you, Dr. Aswati. So you like to just wait for 1 week more?
Yes. Yes,
so she's
yes,
already 39 weeks, and we're discussing she's having no complication at all.
Yeah.
Normal antenatal visits. Age is
Yes,
also more. She's only 24 years old. So
yes,
just do that, and we have to just tell her about danger signs as well.
Yes, yes, ma'am.
So she has to just come earlier if she complains of any pain abdomen, decrease in the movements, or leaky perineum is there. And definitely we're going to do the pelvic assessment, both to assess rule of the CPD.
CPD.
And CPD. So when we like to terminate, Dr. Lola?
Okay. When it is a primary with no comorbidities, nothing, everything is okay, vertex presentation, I would wait. I would wait for spontaneous labor to ensue. I can wait, at the most, I can wait up to 41 weeks, but I won't wait beyond that. Because of the problems associated with late term and post-term pregnancies.
Other panelists can also give their opinion regarding this, till what time they want to wait, why and why not.
My doubt is, shouldn't we give preference to the cultural preferences of the society? Like in certain areas, when we cross 40 weeks, it brings about a lot of anxiety to the people. So should we stick on to the 41 weeks? Or if the Bishop score is favorable?
Dr. Savita?
Yes,
hello?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Yes. Dr. Savita, I would like to say that we can wait till 41 weeks, but when the patient comes at 40 weeks, after assessing everything, I would rather like to do a PV examination and do the stripping at least. We can ask the patient that induction will be done if she doesn't go into labor till 41 weeks, but stripping should be done, and I prefer doing stripping because then we know the inducibility also, and it's a very cut short of induction of labor, and it helps the patient goes into labor many of the times.
Yeah, thank you, doctor. I'm not able to see your name actually. The slide is not showing who was talking.
I am Dr. Parneet, Dr. Savita.
Dr. Parneet. Okay, yeah. So nice to see you. So definitely now, it is just, most of guidelines say that we should go ahead till 41 weeks. So
yes,
Dr. Parneet,
hormonal induction will be done at 41 weeks.
Primary gravida, we have already assessed the pelvis. We rule out the CPD. We can go with the stripping at 40, means might be 40 weeks, 2 and 3 days over, because we don't want in a primary gravida to go beyond 41 weeks. The message should be clear from this that induction should not be done before 40 weeks of the gestation. Though we may start, stripping is a very, very initial thing for the induction of the labor. That can be done at 40 weeks or 40 weeks, 2 and 3 days over, I will say. Because we all
hormonal induction should not be done
earlier, the chances are that there may be failed induction. The chances are that the fetal
Dr. Savita, you are muted. Please unmute.
Somebody is muting me again and again. I'm not doing anything. These technical people, please look after why I'm muted again and again. Am I audible now?
Yes,
The
ma'am.
message should be clear that we do not induce before 40 weeks of the gestation. If she is primary, 40 weeks, 2 and 3 days over, we can go ahead with the stripping and just wait whether she goes into labor or not. And then we can go ahead with the inductions. Reason being that we don't want to increase the incidence of cesarean section. If we do earlier induction, definitely chances of failed induction are there, chances of fetal distress are there, which might lead to increase in the cesarean section rate. But recently, the ACOG 200, this arrived trial was there, so the definite guidelines are not issued by the ACOG 2018, but they say that it is again individualized sometimes that after 39 weeks, you may think of after taking into consideration the cultural things that Dr. Aswati has told. So, but till now we are following the 40 weeks plus 41 weeks.
So now we decided thus that we want to terminate this pregnancy maybe at 40 weeks, 3 days with a favorable cervix. How are you going to proceed, Mumtaz?
Yes, ma'am. It is already told that it is a vortex presentation and pelvis appears gynecoid. I would like to confirm that the fetus is in a good condition by a non-stress test because she has already passed dates, that is 40 weeks. And provided her Doppler and NST are normal and a Leica is normal and it's an average size baby in a flexed attitude. And while thinking about the method of induction, I would give importance to the Bishop score. If it's a very unfavorable cervix, I would like to go with the mechanical one first to start the thing rolling. So mechanically we use the Foley saline, and in the Foley saline we keep it for 24 hours. If it doesn't expel by itself, we remove it after 24 hours. And some situations we give a misoprostol also along with the Foley saline. And the next day after removing the Foley, we go ahead with the misoprostol. Usually that is the regime we follow. Oral misoprostol, 50 microgram, 6 hourly is the one we follow. And in some situations, we can also use Diaprost gel, and the insert is not available to us right now, and it is a little bit expensive also. And if the cervix is already phased and dilated, there is no harm in starting with an oxytocin drip because there the uterus is going to contract against a soft, stretchable cervix. But unless the cervix is phased and dilated to at least 2-3 centimeters, we do not start with oxytocin. We want to prime the cervix first so that once the uterine contractions start, it is going to help the cervix dilate further rather than the contractions going against a hard rock cervix, which can lead to uterine tetany or fetal distress later on. So we want the whole process of the induction being smooth and efficacious by making the cervix favorable first.
Yes, thank you, Mumtaz. But we should always remember that we should not start oxytocin. We should start only 6 hours after a prostaglandin E2 and 4 hours after prostaglandin E1 because we have cases coming over with oxytocin started very early after induction. So these are the things which we should keep in mind to prevent complications. Thank you. Next, please.
One thing we have to keep in mind that mifepristone for the residents, if they are attending, mifepristone for live baby still not has come in most of the guidelines. Though most of us are using for the live baby, for dead baby definitely we are using, you have to use it. But it is just again individualized if you are having your personal experience. So many studies are there, but not the robust data for this. I myself is using in our PGIMS very frequently doing mifepristone for the induction of labor, especially in the uncomplicated in previous cesarean section.
We have not.
We are also using, madam, and even for high-risk patients also we are using.
Yeah, we are using very frequently, very good drug, but still we should go by the message still not in the guidelines to give mifepristone for the live baby.
But I think it is very nice that you people are sharing your experiences. So that's how the data will collect. Thank you, Dr. Jyoti and Dr. Savita.
So the same patient, as suggested, the Bishop score was done. it was 5, means unfavorable Bishop score was there. So priming was done with the drug of choice, the intracervical dinoproston gel. And again, after 6 hours, no improvement was there. So second gel has to be repeated after 6 hours. And she started having uterine contractions 4 to 5 minutes for 20 seconds. PV examination was done. Cervix was 3 centimeters, 60 to 70% effaced, soft, and mid position. So now, definitely she is in the latent phase of the labor. How to monitor this patient, Dr. Omana?
A very good afternoon to all. Very happy to be with you, ma'am, and with Dr. Jyoti. And first, let me first congratulate Dr. Kunjumoideen and Fox team for this wonderful webinar and making me a part of it. I'm thanking you. Now, coming to the case scenario, with this patient in labor, we will treat her with good rapport and good respect, which will give her good confidence. We will give her a birth companion so that her anxiety will be relieved and labor will be progressed soon. Now, adequate pain relief will be of very, very useful to avoid cesarean sections. And infection control will be our best policy. Now, consistent intermittent monitoring of maternal well-being by noting her general condition, pulse rate, BP, temperature every 4 hours. And intermittent monitoring of labor progression parameters. Regular checkup of fetal heart rate, frequency of contractions and adequacy of contractions every half an hour. We will monitor by cervical dilatation and descent of fetal head. Now, maintain adequate.
Are you unmuted?
And then we'll put a partogram, which will definitely help us to note the progress of labor. Intermittent CTG monitoring will be very helpful. And
we will come with those questions little later on about CTG and partogram. Okay. So very well said. Now we all of us know that she's in latent phase of the labor.
Yes.
So very important. The new things which have been added, the support to the mother. So that is respectful maternity care. One single most important thing is the RMC, which we are motivating in now the new scenarios. So for that, we are allowing birth attendant. Even at my institute, we started keeping the birth attendant during the labor to the patient. Even with the COVID time, when it was not so much, we're getting the attendant COVID tested and keeping the patient. And my one thesis topic is also going on the birth attendant for respect to maternity care. It is not the way that is not having the benefit. It is having the benefit for the obstetrician as well as the patient. She's doing so much of work. This definite performer is there. We have to get that performer signed by the attending birth attendant that she will do these and these things for the patient who is a laboring patient. So that has to be told to her before we take the sign of the birth attendant that she is staying with the patient. And more of the litigation sort of things are little less. We think that it may be more if birth attendant is there. They will see the thing, but it is not like that. Because once birth attendant is there with the patient, so we are definitely going to work in a better way. So it improves the maternal care very well. So that has to be kept along with so that will give the emotional support along with doing some physical, these pain relief methods. She will massage the back of the patient. She can give the acupressure. She can give the hot water bottle. She can provide the medicine to the patient. So she's great help. And the message should be that everybody should try to keep the birth attendants, and that birth attendant has to be identified with the antenatal period itself so that they are prepared. Who will be staying with the patient during labor? So that is identified during the labor, this antenatal period itself.
They can no, sorry to interrupt, Savita ma'am. It's written move the window away from the shared application. Maybe that is why.
I don't know why it is coming. Yeah, I don't know why it is.
Maybe that is why your voice is somewhat muffled at times.
Yeah, some of this.
Maybe mobile is
there. Yeah.
Would you like to stop and reshare again?
Okay, I can do that. Is it okay now?
Yeah. Slide share. The other one. Full screen, ma'am.
Is it okay?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So now, what is your latent phase, Dr. Prakash?
Good afternoon, everybody. The Friedman historically divided the first stage of labor into the latent phase and active phase. A definition of prolonged latent phase is based on data from the Friedman. In the primary gravida, the mean duration of latent phase is around 6.4 hours. When it crosses more than 20 hours, then it is said it is a prolonged latent phase in primary gravida. While in the multigravida, when the mean latent phase duration is around 4.8 hours, when it crosses more than 14 hours, that is 95th percentile, means it is prolonged latent phase. In the prolonged latent phase, expectant management is there, therapeutic rest, and some analysis can be given. If there is no any indication for the delivery of the baby is there, some women can spend days in the latent phase and stop the contraction. Some women will achieve the active phase after giving some oxytocin injection or sometimes after doing the amniotomy or both together. So this is the prolonged latent phase.
Yes, Dr. Prakash. So with the different regimes, they say that once the patient gets into active labor, the prolonged latent phase may vary with different patients. But what we should understand that it's not a diagnosis. It tells us that some pathology going on and we have to be careful. And independently, it is associated with increased incidence of cesarean section, depressed Apgar scores, and need for neonatal resuscitation. And sometimes the oxytocin augmentation may not help also, and there's increase in C-section rates. So we should keep in mind, and according to the new labor protocol, we should definitely wait till if the mother and fetal conditions are good and decide on the further progress. Thank you.
In continuation with that, what can the causes and management of prolonged latent phase, Dr. Reshma?
As sir told and Jyoti ma'am told, according to newer guidelines, the previous definition has changed actually. It is very difficult to ascertain a standardized definition or duration for latent phase. So because there is only slow effacement and dilatation in latent phase. And now what is being told by WHO and ACOG is that the start of latent phase cannot be ascertained, because in late phases of pregnancy itself, there can be little dilatation and effacement. And also sometimes the false labor pain may come along with the latent phase, so it may be considered as prolonged. So first, we have to ascertain whether it is a prolonged latent phase or not. And the latent phase is taken till 5 or 6 centimeters. Only after 6 centimeters dilatation, it is considered as active phase. But whenever we think that there is a prolongation, we have to think of other conditions that can lead to it, like prolonged latent phase, a very unfavorable cervix, or any induced labor. All those are likely causes of increased latent phase. And also we have to reassess the patient regarding by doing a abdominal and vaginal examination, what is the position, whether it is whether it is occipital transverse, occipital posterior, or some malpresentations. All these things has to be reassessed, and accordingly we have to go. And it is told that previously it was told we can give sedation, and it is our routine practice to do an amniotomy and go for oxytocin, etc. Apart from companionship and the pain relief methods we were told. But now the latest, what is told us as by Jyoti ma'am, we should not intervene unnecessarily till they reach 6 centimeters dilatation, because that is going to increase cesarean section rate. If maternal and fetal conditions are reassuring, better that we wait till active phase of 6 centimeters. But this is the guideline, present guideline. But I also want to get it cleared, because most of us are still sticking on to the previous guidelines.
Very excellently said, Dr. Reshma. So this is the message that now the duration of latent stage is not being mentioned anywhere. Previously for 20 hours, but now we don't say any. First, we have to identify whether really she is in a latent labor or she's a false labor pain she is having. And one more concept is there, that if patient comes very, very early labor pains, two theories are there, whether to admit the patient at that time or delay admission. So if you go for delay admission in the latent phase, that is always better, because patient will be at home, but she has to monitor the fetal movements. And if you admit early in the initial later phase, definitely the obstetrician and the patient both are going to be anxious that now no pains are not happening, and go for induction, go for this. So anxiety level will be there for the obstetrician and the patient and the family. So one concept is there, we can avoid the delay admission in the latent phase so as to avoid the augmentation by prostaglandin and oxytocins.
So now in this patient, what is the role of CTG, Dr. Parneet?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Mitra, for inviting me to this panel discussion. In this case, in induction of labor, CTG is advisable, but when the patient enters the active phase of labor. Before induction, we can do an NST for the patient. And when induction is done, once the patient enters active phase of labor, then definitely cardiotopography is recommended even by the GCPR FOXY guidelines also, when the patient is in active phase of labor.
What about risk assessment? Actually speaking, the guidelines say that routine CTG is not recommended for fetal well-being in low-risk patients who are coming in spontaneous labor. Because what if the fetal heart rate patterns, you can see in this graph that as long as the fetal heart rate patterns and the fetal accelerations are there, there's not much problem to the fetus. But there is a catch. Next slide, please.
Yes, ma'am. If the patient is in spontaneous labor, then we don't need a CTG.
Yeah.
Then we can intermittent auscultation is fine. But here we have induced the patient, so we can do intermittent auscultation also. But in active phase, or if we find any abnormality while doing intermittent auscultation with fetoscope or Doppler, then definitely CTG will be advisable.
Definitely. There are certain risk factors which develop in labor itself, that she is on oxytocin augmentation, she is on epidurals, she has vaginal bleeding or any pyrexia or meconium staining. Definitely in labor, these problems are developing. We've got to switch on to CTG monitoring, and also if there are inherent maternal and fetal problems. Yes. Next, please. Next slide, please, ma'am.
So as very rightly pointed out by Dr. Parneet, so if it is induced labor, might be normal, no complication, then we have to go for the CTG. But in spontaneous, there is no need of the CTG as per the guidelines. So what is the role of amniotomy? And I think half of the question has already been discussed. Role of amniotomy and augmentation in latent phase by Dr. Prakash.
Madam, routinely amniotomy does not significantly reduce the first stage of labor in primary as well as multigravida. ACOG states ACOG has not issued any statement regarding doing a routine amniotomy in the labor, but in the cases of dystocia where abnormal labor is there, they said that doing amniotomy will improve or progress the labor in the active phase, but the possibility of chorioamnionitis is there. After doing the amniotomy, some possible risks should be considered. That is prolapse of the umbilical cord, significant cord compression may be there, chorioamnionitis possibility is there. Sometimes rupture of the vasa preva is there. So all these things are to be taken in mind while doing the amniotomy.
Very well said. Very well said. So no role of amniotomy. This is mainly for we are discussing spontaneous, non-complicated pregnancy. If patient is in preeclampsia, she's in IUGR, she's previously cesarean or some other complication, then sometimes you might have to land up with the amniotomy to see the condition of the fetus and meconium staining is not there. It is only for these normal pregnancy we are discussing. So after the patient has gone into the labor, the induction was done with the dinoprostone. Partogan was maintained for about 10 hours. And after 10 hours, the fetal ultrasound regular contraction was 30 to 35 minutes, 3 to 4 centimeters. On per vaginum, 5 centimeters dilated, fully effaced, membranes are present, when she is going towards the active phase of the labor. So how to monitor the active phase of labor? And what is the prolonged first stage of labor, Dr. Aswati?
Monitoring the active labor, ma'am, in the active phases when it is 6 centimeter dilated onwards. And we have to monitor the vitals of the mother and the fetal condition by intermittent auscultation of the fetal heart rate during contraction and after contraction. So we have to do a pervaginal examination every 4th hourly and assess the descent of the head and rule out any malpositions and assess the progress of the labor. So we say that there is a prolonged first stage of labor, when there is prolonged active phase of labor, when there is, in spite of regular uterine contractions, adequate contractions, if there is no change in cervical effacement of more than 4 centimeters after 4 hours, and in spite of irregular uterine contractions, in spite of after 6 hours, if there is no cervical change, we say there is a protracted active effacement.
Thank you, Dr. Avasthi. Main is that there is one new generation partogram has been introduced by WHO recently, which is having 7 sections. And this is an old partogram, which is a very simplified one. In these sections, one is the respect to maternity care has been added, and one section of decision making has been added by the obstetrician. So one should be aware, though it is very, very difficult to fill, I think. I don't know whether we can use this partogram in routine in our practice or not, but I wanted to project it that this new partogram has been introduced by the WHO. And these 7 components are there. These 2 are the new components. One more thing which I want to add about the prolonged...
Is Dr. Savita also
yes, Dr. Praneeth, just go ahead. Anji, Dr. Praneeth, you want to say something?
I just wanted to add that according to the WHO, it is... Yes, ma'am, according to WHO, it is till 5 centimeters. It is the latest phase, and from 5 centimeters onwards, we take the active phase of labor.
After 5, it is active stage of labor. Yes. Till 5, it is a latent phase. So, as we used to say previously, if the cervical dilatation is, if you take in 1 centimeter, we assess after 2 hours. There is no cervical dilatation at all. So we should not label the patient as a prolonged second stage of the, now prolonged first stage of labor. It is in total duration now we are taking, as told by Dr. Asti. It is not the 1 centimeter per hour. So that is a change in the latest definitions of the prolonged second stage, the prolonged first stage, and for the second stage, it is still same 3 hours for nulliparous and 2 hours for the multigravida. And these are points already discussed. Dr. Jyoti?
So, I just wanted to know about what idea about intrapartum ultrasound.
The role of intrapartum ultrasound, madam, in labor is mainly to assess the fetal position and the progress of the labor, the descent of the head, either a abdominal or a transperineal ultrasound to assess any fetal malposition.
Yes, Ashwati. Next slide, please. So we know that ICO says that when there is slow progress or arrest of labor in the first or second stage, you can use an intrapartum ultrasound, and it needs a low frequency transducer. And they say that it can document fetal descent rotation in second stage better than the digital examination. It is more objective and reproducible. And what you see is the angle of progression and head to perineum distance. So these are the 2 parameters, and also the rotation is can be seen on ultrasound, transperineal ultrasound. And in a study of nulliparous patient in spontaneous labor at the head to perineal distance of 30 millimeter, an angle of progression of 125 degrees predicted delivery within 3 hours. So this can be a predictive tool in future once we get accustomed to using it. Next, please. So this is another case scenario. Mrs. Y, 26-year-old, second gravida with 40 weeks of pregnancy, vertex presentation, previous cesarean section done for meconium, stained liquor, and fetal distress. She has no other risk factors. Now she's coming in the antenatal period for management. So will you induce, and if so, how to induce, Dr. Reshma? She wants a vaginal delivery.
You have to unmute. Dr. Reshma, unmute yourself, please.
Yes. She's a second gravida. So I'll see the positive factors that is by which we can take her for trial of labor after cesarean section. So well, it was a previous lower segment cesarean section. This is the first and foremost. And she has her interdelivery interval is 3 years. And it was lower segment cesarean section. And she has presented at present with 40 weeks of gestation. So I will first discuss with the patient at present. I will examine her condition at present. abdominal examination as well as a vaginal examination to find out the gestational, the fetal weight and whether the head is engaged or not, whether the vaginal examination to assess the Bishop score, whether the cervix is favorable or not, and also to rule out occipito-transverse, occipito-posterior positions, etc. And find out the present condition also, then discuss with the patient regarding the risks and benefits of planned repeat cesarean and TOLAC and what we can do with the failed TOLAC. So if the patient is willing, after having discussed, shared decision is made and documentation, because we have facility for all the for performing TOLAC, like presence of anesthetist, presence of pediatrician and staff for the same. We will discuss with the patient, and if the patient wants to go for a cesarean section, but if the cervix is very much unfavorable, the chance of likelihood, chance of success of TOLAC is much less and chance of uterine rupture is more. So better that we explain that to her. And also the previous indication was fetal distress. So there is 80% chance of success for that. So we have to discuss about everything. But if she's insistent, if the cervix is very favorable, then there's no doubt that we can, and she wants a TOLAC, we can go for it. And but if the cervix is a bit unfavorable and if she wants to go for a trial, we should not use, induction is not contraindicated. We can induce her provided we have documented everything. And we should not use prostaglandins because prostaglandins will cause more chance of uterine rupture. The best method, if the cervix is very favorable, we can go for oxytocin. But if it is unfavorable, Bishop score is less, we can go for a mechanical dilatation with Foley's. And every time we should keep a low threshold for cesarean section, because especially if there is no previous history of vaginal delivery and if the Bishop score is much less, there is higher chance of failure of trial of labor and there is higher chance of uterine rupture. So we have to, risk-benefit ratio has to be weighed every time, and then we will proceed.
Yes, Reshma. And what about ultrasound in scar?
Ma'am, shall I?
Yes.
Ma'am, whenever there is an indication of fetal distress, maybe we should also find out why there was fetal distress. Because some of the distresses are due to prolonged labor, failure to descend, or metal contraction. Those things can also lead to fetal distress. Whether she was in labor, what was the duration of labor.
So proper history taking.
It was done in the second stage also, we did not know.
Yeah.
Finally, the baby would have had some distress.
Second stage cesarean section, better to avoid.
It would have written as fetal distress only.
Yes, so previous history of cesarean is very important. And what about scar? This slide, please. Scar assessment by ultrasound. Although it is not standardized, but they say that if the scar is less than 2 to 2.5 millimeters, then the prognosis is not good. So you can do a scar assessment. There are studies who are assessing scars between 24 to 28 weeks and after 36 weeks. But as Mumtaz said, that previous history of detailed, if she has undergone cesarean in our institution, we may know that, but the previous history of cesarean section is very important to decide regarding whether we want to keep up for TOLAC or whether we want to induce labor. Next slide.
Can I just give my little information?
Yes, sure.
Yeah. Actually, I would like to be corrected if I'm wrong. But even when we are in an intact uterus, if we look at the lower segment in an engaged head, and if we look at the thickness of the myometrium, it's quite thin actually. It is 3 millimeters or so only. Another thing is that the scar can be best assessed in a transvaginal scan when it is a non-pregnant or early pregnancy. That's the time you can see the actual, depth of the isthmocele or the scarring. It comes out very beautifully. But when it is a full term, at that time, there are a lot of papers that we shouldn't be asking for scar thickness. This is, I would like Dr. Jyoti and Dr. Savita to actually give the final verdict. That
final verdict is that nowadays we're not going for scar thickness by any method. Only the scar integrity, one method is a clinical method. You have to go by the previous history. Why the cesarean section was done, whether it was prolonged labor, obstructed labor, whether there was sepsis in the previous cesarean delivery. So that are the high risk factor when we could avoid the induction. Previous scar was weak. We think the scar might have been weak due to infection, due to previous PPH, due to indication of the obstructed labor or prolonged labor. So we should not go for the scar thickness by ultrasound in a present scenario. These are all options, not in the guidelines. And moreover, the one message should very, very clear from these that we want to declare cesarean section. The very less aggressive methods can be considered for the previous cesarean scar. Very less aggressive means Foley's catheter or laminated dents or the mifepristone. These can be used for the induction, not the prostatectomy altogether contraindicated for induction. Induction should always be carried out at some place. It should be blankly, they should go to the message that induction should be done in previous cesarean. It should be carried out when the facility for blood transfusion, when the facility for managing rupture uterus, because in spite of all these, we cannot avoid the chance of rupture uterus after induction. That is after VBAC as well as after induction. So that has to be kept in mind. But for no recurrent indication, where we think the scar is healthy enough, we can go with the induction with the less aggressive method. It has to be done. And as per the ACOG guidelines, they should never be more than 40 weeks. Because non-scar, we're saying we can go up to 41 to 42 weeks. But for the scarred uterus, it should be till 40 weeks. We can try it in between 39 to 40 weeks if you're planning for the induction. This 40 weeks is the end point for the induction. Because if patient goes in spontaneous labor, that is always, always better for the spontaneous labor in previous scar.
So now what are the contraindications for Tolac?
Hello.
Dr. Prajala?
Yeah. Good afternoon to all. I'm happy to be a part of this meeting here today. And the question that has been put to me, actually, it has already been discussed for some time. So I'll just put it in a nutshell. Now, it's very difficult to actually have absolute answers because, the 25th edition of Williams, it starts the chapter on previous cesarean birth with 100 years of controversy. And I don't think we are anywhere near the end of the tunnel, not seeing any light as yet. Yes. But we have recently some evidence which tells us that definitely we are all looking out to reduce the cesarean section rate. And one of the major factors that we have to look for is reducing the cesarean section rate in previous cesareans. So what we need to remember is that in well-selected patients with Tolac, you can have around 70 to 75% success rate. And the vaginal delivery is always much, much better for the mother and the baby than a cesarean section. Mortality is always lower in a vaginal section, in a vaginal delivery than a cesarean section. So what we should do is we should choose wisely, because with an emergency cesarean section and a failed Tolac, then you have problems. Problems for the mother, problems for the baby, not to speak of problems for the obstetrician. So that means we should choose wisely. So what are the absolute contraindications where you would not keep a patient for Tolac and therefore would not induce a patient with a previous rupture? She has a 5 to 6% risk of repeating her rupture, so definitely no. A patient with a previous classical cesarean section. Here again, the risk of rupture is double. So again, no. Now, and a patient who has a contraindication to vaginal delivery, for example, a major previa, somewhere where you cannot keep her for vaginal delivery. Now, these are definite absolute contraindications. As for relative contraindications are things like a previous T or a previous J incision or an extension of a scar, especially in a second stage cesarean section done previously, or any other significant surgery on the uterus like a myomectomy, which can be open or laparoscopic, or a patient with a septal resection. Now, these are all contraindications. And here, in actually the guidelines, the RCOG guidelines and all, in these situations, which I've said just now, the previous T and J, here actually there are not enough studies to recommend to either keep for Tolac or to not keep for Tolac. So basically, you have to weigh in the decisions individually, take a combined decision with the patient, and then come to a conclusion. Now, there are some other situations, again, where studies do not give us a proper recommendation regarding safety. That is what we've already discussed earlier, like a mother who's beyond 40 years of age, or who has a BMI of more than 30, someone who's gone beyond 40 weeks. So that means she's not gone into spontaneous labor. So now whether we should induce or not, someone who has a complication like diabetes or preeclampsia, where that's an added risk factor, with macrosomia may be there, or uteroplacental insufficiency might be there. These are women where you have to evaluate the risks. Then again, we were talking about scar thickness. What the evidence says is that with a scar thickness of less than 2 millimeters, 0.6 to 2 millimeters, the chance of a uterine defect, it's a positive predictor for a uterine defect occurring in labor. But however, these cannot be actually applied clinically to decide whether you can keep this patient for TOLAC or not. So all said and done, we have to weigh in all the possibilities, explain not only the risks, but also the benefits to the patient, and then take a decision. Again, one more thing I'd like to say is about previous 2CS. Now, a previous 2CS patient to keep for TOLAC, there's not an absolute contraindication. What they say is that the chance of success is actually good, but the risk of rupture is slightly more than a previous 1CS. Now here you have to also factor in aspects like if she's had previous vaginal deliveries, then her success, the likelihood of success is more. And if she wants many more pregnancies, then again, maybe she should probably take a little risk and attempt a TOLAC. So these are some aspects like where you would think whether to go in for a TOLAC or not, what are the contraindications for induction. Now the methods I think we've already dealt with. Mifepristone is contraindicated definitely. PGE2, there are not really enough studies to recommend efficacy, and we can use mechanical methods. But we should remember that in patients who need induction, they have a 2 to 3-fold risk of rupture, 2 to 3 times increased chance of rupture, and a 1.5 times risk of going in for a cesarean section. That means a failure, rather than women who do not need induction.
Thank you, Dr. Sujala, for elaborating in great detail. Now, supposing the patient is in labor, how do we monitor, Ashwati?
My patient for TOLAC, if she is in labor, considering it as a high-risk pregnancy, she needs a one-to-one supportive care, and with adequate blood, everything ready, and with a probability for cesarean section being high, it is always better to keep her nil orally or clear fluids orally, but maintain hydration for sure. And a continuous electronic fetal monitoring is mandatory here, this being a high-risk pregnancy. And also we have to do 4th hourly PV and assess the progress of labor, rule out dystocia or any malpositions, in which case we have to terminate the attempt for TOLAC. And epidural is not strictly contraindicated in this case, and we can always cut short the second stage by vacuum forceps. And one thing is that we should be at a lookout for we should be lookout for all the high risk signs for impending dehiscence or rupture. So what are these points? One is either one of the earliest signs being a fetal tachycardia.
Dr. Lola will be answering that question.
Yes, thank you, Ashwati. I think Dr. Lola can talk about scar dehiscence. Since we are running late, Ashwati.
Yeah, we have to wind up.
The signs of scar dehiscence.
I'm sorry, excellent discussion is going on. But yes, please continue.
Yeah, that will be first. We will see an abnormal fetal heart racing. Probably the first thing we see will be that only. There may be a baseline bradycardia or a tachycardia. There may be variable or late decelerations. And then you will get loss of fetal heart sounds. There may be maternal tachycardia. The uterine contour will be lost. There may be loss of station. And sometimes if it's fully ruptured and the babies come out, you can feel the firm, well-contracted uterus beside the fetal parts. And then she can go into features of hypovolemia, shock, hematuria. All this will be the features will be coming. The first and foremost, I will say, will be the CTG, will be the one to alert you.
Yes, Dr. Lola. So we should understand the signs and symptoms when we're keeping such a patient in labor, and definitely no spontaneous labors are associated with less chances of rupture as compared to induced labor. So we have to be very cautious. Next slide, please. Should we go for the third scenario, madam? Because there's no time.
We have the quiz, and after the quiz, we have the
okay, so we can just omit the third case.
Run the cases faster in case, like every discussion and the efforts that you both have put is really very nice.
One message is there now from the previous cesarean section, as Dr. Sajla has said. The previous 2 cesarean also we're going for. The patient comes in spontaneous labor with previous 2, and no high risk factors are there, we can go for the vaginal delivery. These are recent things. The previous two can also deliver vaginally. So the third case, Mrs. X, 27-year-old, second gravida with 40 weeks pregnancy, cephalic presentation, uncomplicated, came with labor pain. She was exhausted, dehydrated, having period and efforts. Uterus was thumb size, contraction, very good contraction. She was having 2 to 3 minutes. On PV examination, fully dilated, fully effaced. There was no liquor, and just dry labor was there. Sutures were transverse, caper was 2+, molding was there. What is the diagnosis, Dr. Mumtaz? You can hurry up in 1 or 2 lines.
Yes, ma'am. To be very brief, it is transverse arrest. Because in spite of good uterine contraction, it is in that remaining in the transverse line itself, and there is significant caput and molding, which is pathological. So the diagnosis is deep transverse arrest, leading to obstructed labor.
So what are the causes?
What can be the possible causes? Oh, sorry, Dr. Jyoti.
The most
Jyoti, go ahead.
Cause for faulty, it's a faulty pelvic configuration, and the most notorious is the android features of the pelvis, and in which there may be prominent spines or the convergent pelvic walls, or there may be a flat sacrum, which let the occiput to rotate, and there is arrest of deep transverse arrest. And of course, there may be abnormal uterine action also, which may cause the deep transverse arrest. But most important is the faulty configuration of the pelvis, and android pelvis is the one android feature which is notorious for causing deep transverse arrest.
Okay, how do you deliver, Dr. Prakash, a deep transverse arrest?
Keel and forceps was used very frequently in 1970s. That is around 44% time it was used, but it has disappeared by around 1990. And it took the vacuum extractor or forceps extraction or cesarean section is the nowadays used commonly for the deep transverse arrest. Another thing is manual rotation followed by forceps application or vacuum extractor can be used. But cesarean section is an other alternative, but doing cesarean section will not reduce the perinatal morbidity. In the manual rotation, we can do the pervaginal examination. The prerequisite for the manual rotation is cervix should be fully dilated. There should be not deeply engaged head in the maternal pelvis. And we can start the procedure either when the patient starts the first urge to push the baby, or when the 1 hour completed after the cervical dilation. Then do the PV examination. Membranes should be ruptured, and insert your index finger at the lambdoid sutures, press the lambdoid suture so that it will give the more flexion, and give during contraction time and ask the patient to bear down, rotate the fetal head gradually, and keep the rotation for 2 to 3 contraction, and even after the 2 to 3 contraction, maintain the position for another 2 to 3 contraction such that it will not revert back. Another alternative method can be, you can insert the finger just behind the ear, or you can insert the hand just behind the occiput and make the rotation. So
Prakash, are we still going for these manual rotations?
But few people are doing manual rotations. It is not.
In our institute, we're not doing manual rotations nowadays. Nobody is perfect. Nobody knows how to go ahead with this actually.
Zero level maybe little too high for the rotation.
Any of the panelists were going with the manual rotations?
No.
Give their opinion.
Not at zero.
I think nobody is using manual rotation nowadays. But for teaching purpose, we should know what it is. We should know what is a manual rotation, which are being used earlier, and what is being used. Dr. Mumtaz, can we highlight what is the method being used nowadays? These are all methods. Keel and forceps, again, you are not using nowadays.
No, we go for a cesarean section, ma'am, straight away. If it is
so, when we go for the cesarean, what precautions are to be taken? That is very, very important.
Yes.
How to deliver the baby. That is the one thing we wanted to know. How to deliver the baby in DTA. Dr. Mumtaz?
Yes, ma'am. In DTA, in the scenario that you showed, the lower segment would be stretched and maybe edematous and will be pulled up. So we have to be careful while delivering the baby, because that can lead to tear in the lower segment. So maybe it is better to keep the bladder away from the situation. And
just in one line, you tell which methods can be used for delivering a baby in case of deep transverse arrest.
What the method is
for
best?
delivering the baby? Any panelist can give the opinion.
For the method, if the incision is corresponding to the shoulder, and the shoulder.
And another thing is take the incision at a higher side.
Yes, when we put the incision at the higher side, most of the time.
Very well said. Very well said.
Shoulders. So it is further than that.
Fetal pillow is something which is.
Yeah, yesterday they were talking about fetal pillow also, which is
Yes, and then.
So what can be the consequences? Now patient comes in neglected labor and she's not being taken care. Can we prevent DTA? First is this, and what can be the consequences?
Prevention of DTA, basically we have to be on the lookout for women who have these high risk factors like a macrosomia, cephalopelvic disproportion, a deflexed head, or a pendulous abdomen, which suggests also that the pelvic floor is lax, or women with like an android or an android platyploid pelvis where the forepelvis, the space is less. These are the women where we can expect that they may go in for a transverse arrest. So we have to be on the lookout. We may use an intrapartum ultrasound to judge the position, to see, like Jyoti said, the angle of progression, the head symphysis distance, the head progression distance. All these will give you an idea as to what can be the success rate of your operative vaginal delivery or whether you should attempt. In modern obstetrics, obviously, we will go in for a cesarean section. So to prevention basically is to judge, find out that it is, find out early enough that this is a lady who's likely to go in for an arrest and prevent the arrest. Try and take preventive measures even before. The mother can get exhausted. You must give her IV fluids. If the contractions are not adequate and you think there is no CPD, the baby is likely to rotate, you can give her some augmentation if the contractions are inadequate. And this is how you will try and prevent the ill effects of DTA, deep transverse arrest.
Now just we are going to wind up.
And the take home. Just one point, ma'am. When we do the second, if you know that head is little bit deflexed, again, it is possible that the descent and rotation is going to be slower, or it may end up in it.
And occipital posterior. These are two commonest causes for the DTA, occipital posterior and the deflexed head. So you have to be vigilant these two conditions.
Yes.
You have to give the very poor uterine contraction with these two conditions, more chances that she can land up with deep transverse arrest. Yeah. The rotation will not be there. So this is very important. So just to decrease the incidence of primary and secondary cesarean, so take home message is that don't go for the unnecessary interventions in latent, especially in the latent phase, like the amniotomy, oxytocin augmentation, no routine enema. Patient should be kept ambulatory or whatever position she likes. She can be left lateral, she can be sitting, she can roam about. And try to use the new generation partograph, respectful maternity care, very, very important supportive method, and to avoid inductions before 40 weeks of the pregnancy in uncomplicated pregnancies. Dr. Jyoti, please.
Yes, and definitely as we discussed, the cases of C-section in labor need one-to-one monitoring and decision, and usually at a tertiary center. Secondary arrest of labor needs expertise in operative interventions to prevent complications. And as we discussed, ultrasound will play a major role in decision making. I would like to thank all the panelists for the active discussion, and I hope we have dispelled some of the myths of labor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very, very well prepared panel, and I think still you have finished it in record time. All the cases have been discussed. I congratulate Dr. Savita and Dr. Jyoti and all the panelists for giving very good inputs. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Kunju, for making part of this.
All the panelists done very wonderful job. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll move on to the next session, that is Quiz. I request Dr. Mitra to introduce the Quiz master.
Okay, so friends, this is a very, very nice session, and I will request all the panelists and the moderators, all the faculty also, only those who know the answers, they cannot appear. So I think Dr. Kunju and me, we are deprived of this prize. And I have to introduce a very young budding gynecologist. Well, he is Dr. Aneet